So just first, when we start, I want to take a minute to define what I mean by a static JSON API. It really is literally what it sounds like. It's static web pages, but it's JSON content instead of HTML. So this is what some examples look like in the browser, that you just go to it, nice JSON route, and you get JSON data. So it's all JSON formatted. Like I said, you only can do GET requests. So it's really meant for just reading data because it is static. You build all of the data when you run Eleventy, when you do your site build. Since it is static, requests happen almost immediately. There's no trip to the database. There's no building the JSON data and getting it out there. And you can serve this information from a static web hosting page, same as you would any other kind of content. So you don't need a web server. You don't need a scripting language like PHP or Python. You just put it up there, and applications and visitors can start consuming that information right away. So pretty straightforward. There's no secrets, not really very much magic. You may be thinking, well, why do I need this? Why do I need a static JSON API? What good is this? Why don't I just serve it out of a web server, out of a database? That all works fine. I could use serverless, something, to do that if I need. And you're not wrong. But for me, for my use case, I needed to serve data for another application to use. And I didn't want to have to build an entire extra application to manage that. I wanted people on my team to be able to make updates and changes as necessary. The data wasn't going to change very often, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, I would say. And I wanted people to be able to get in there and manage it. And in a lot of cases, what this looks like for development teams is you have a database, you write a simple web app that you then have to maintain. And all it is for is just CRUD, create, read, update, delete. That's all it is. Sounds simple on the surface, but if you've tried to do this, well, what about authentication? Where's the data going to live? Do you have a server? Who's going to watch that server? Do you need to configure a web server? What tools are you going to use? Who's going to maintain this code over the long run? Because if you don't have an answer for that, it's going to be you, as long as you're at that same company or team or organization. So for me, this was an approach I looked at to try to let me expose this information and give people a way to edit the data through a code editor or version control. You just push this up into GitLab or GitHub or whatever version control system you're using. If somebody needs to make a change later, they just pull the repo down, make a change to the base data, and rerun Eleventy and call it a day. And that, for me, it cut out all of this overhead, all of this extra coding I would have to do, all of this extra work I'd have to do just to serve data for another application to read and still let people change it and access it and control it. One other use case that I like is serving your website content in another format. So let's say you've got a blog or some other kind of static content on your site, and you want to expose it for other applications to consume, or you want to make available a subset of that data to feed widgets for sidebar types of things, showing other posts or highlighting certain titles on the main page or showing bits or really any kind of arbitrary thing. You can use this approach to enhance your existing Eleventy site to have a whole set of JSON content that a web application could consume, or that your users could consume through this other means programmatically. I will say, if you do this, you just have to watch out for duplicate content. That's when search engines see the same kind of text content on multiple pages under the same domain. This can penalize your website's SEO quality, you could say, and it can hurt your search results. There are tools for managing this. You can do things like controlling your robots.txt. I've got some examples there on how you do that. You just disallow the route where you put your JSON files. So like in this example, the JSON files live under /JSON. And that directive tells the search crawlers to ignore those files, don't index them, which works. That's fine. I mean, really, you shouldn't be indexing the JSON stuff in many cases because you'd rather have your main content get indexed anyway. Some search engine providers do have tools where you can manage this at their side. I know Google lets you set like a canonical URL of your site that you can use to tell it to deprioritize pages that aren't under that URL. So this is another way you can manage that and avoid that penalty or that tax when you want to expose your data in multiple formats on the same site. One other way or one other use for this is serving any kind of arbitrary data in JSON. Eleventy makes a really nice, easy tool, as we'll see later, for just pulling in data in one format and outputting it in another. Even in the docs, you can find examples on these types of data formats that I've listed. And you can use JavaScript to pull anything you can do with JavaScript, reading files, pulling databases, retrieving files through HTTP. You can take that transform it into data, pass it into Eleventy in the data cascade, and have it come out as JSON with relatively simple filters on the other side. So this is really helpful if you've got some data that's locked away or put away, or if you just want to take a snapshot, or if it exists in these not web-friendly formats and you want to get it out there and make it available for an application or a user without having to write an express application or middleware or some kind of web app to do all this stuff for you, just to serve data and have it be readable by users over HTTP. And then finally, this is one that I recently thought of that I haven't had a chance to try out, but I think it would work. It's using a static JSON API as a cache, you could say. So, are you caching your database queries right now? If you are caching database queries, like your read queries, this is probably a good candidate for you to save that database trip. I was thinking of this use case for like e-commerce kind of websites, or websites with content that is dynamically built, but isn't actually dynamic. So what I mean by that is, like, let's say an e-commerce product page. There's a bunch of information on that page that's going to be relatively static or the same from visitor to visitor. So like the name of the product, its current price, its tags, categories, description, user information about it, those kinds of things that will be the same for every single visitor. What you can do is you can take that kind of information, you can process it, using JavaScript data files, put it into Eleventy, output it as JSON, and serve that information into your website using JavaScript dynamically, instead of having to, go to a web server, wait for it to execute a scripted programming language, execute a query against the database, hit the database cache, come back through the scripting language, come back to the web server, and come back to you over the internet. And one of the things I like about this approach too is that you can cut down on your server overload. You don't need to have as many servers to run this kind of stuff for this piece. Not a great fit for every use case, I'm sure, but certainly something to consider if you are if you've got a data set that's living inside of a database and it doesn't actually change, and the database is just there to let people update it easily through a web interface. You can get it out to JSON, and then you can keep it fresh the same way as you would pretty much with database content. I mean, if somebody makes a change to a website that uses the database cache usually gets invalidated and rebuilt so that when the next visitor comes and makes that query, it'll have the fresh data. You can take that same kind of process with Eleventy. You'll have to do a little bit of CI/CD type work, set up your repo to trigger that build when it happens. But that's not too hard to do. And if you've got some servers lying around, I would say you can also always set up Eleventy to rebuild periodically. So a lot of database caches, they have, they'll refresh every hour or every 60 minutes. Well, 60 minutes is an hour. Every 30 minutes or every day or something like that. Just you can easily set up a cron job or some kind of schedule to run Eleventy and rebuild every hour, every day. And thanks to Eleventy being Eleventy, it's pretty fast and quick to rebuild and get those changes out there. And again, I like this approach because really how much of that information actually changes on a daily basis. I know there's some dynamic pieces like discounts based on cookies and things like that. And you could still do that client side and make that work and still have a server. But for a lot of this information that currently comes out of a database, you could probably cache it through this approach. So those are some ways I envision getting some benefit from using a static JSON API. I'm going to show you real quick through some code examples how this all works. It's actually really simple using Eleventy to do this. So one of the key parts is setting up custom filters and data extensions. You can do this in your .eleventy.js file inside of your Eleventy project. This example I have here, it has 3 filters and a data extension, and it uses the third-party JS YAML package from NPM. So if you start from the top, that first filter is a filter I added to just convert any given input to JSON, just JSON.stringify. Super simple. That's exactly what it is. The second filter is kind of a debug filter so that I could see what the keys are in the Eleventy collection and the data that was coming through Eleventy, so I could know which part I need to JSON.stringify. You don't necessarily need that keys filter. The third filter is for that use case I mentioned where you take post data that exists in your site and you take some piece of it and turn it into JSON so that you can expose your post content data in another format. As you can see, I've taken a subset of the post data, just the title, the description, and the literal content that Eleventy parses, I've put it into a object and I've stringified that object, and it'll come out as JSON on the other side that anybody could consume programmatically. And then finally, I have a data extension for YAML. So this just lets Eleventy parse YAML files that end in .yaml, and put them in the data cascade. And I'll show you a little later how we take that and combine it with the JSON output to take YAML and get JSON. So that's really the main piece that makes all of this happen. We have a little bit of work in templates to do that I'll show next, and I'll show the resulting code. But it actually is pretty simple and straightforward to build this JSON API for different arbitrary data formats through Eleventy. So first, I have just an example where you just take straight JSON from a JSON file and you just output it in your site. So the top is an example, a snippet of the JSON content. The middle part is the template, the Eleventy template. As you can see, all it is just a permalink and a template that takes the data file, the global data file, hardware-specs.json, outputs it as JSON, and then you get this output you see on the bottom inside of your Eleventy site. Very straightforward, just takes JSON in, JSON out from your global data directory. So this is great if you've got JSON files that have been output or computed through another means, or pulled through another service that you want to add inside of your site to make it web accessible. I understand you could just drop the JSON file in your web directory and call it a day. I know it's a little easier to manage with Eleventy, and then having it in Eleventy though lets you do some fancier things. So for example, on this next slide, we have that same data JSON file in the global data directory. We have a little bit more complex template where we paginate the data. And what this template you see here in the middle does, it goes through that raw JSON file, and it picks out all of the objects, and it paginates through them using Eleventy's pagination, and it makes a separate standalone page for every single individual piece of JSON data contained in that big JSON array. So in this case, we've got a big blob of server specs, different kinds of server hardware types, but this template will take that and just output one for this particular type called compute, because that's the slug that was given it. This is the kind of data that I needed to output for another application. But this is real world what I was trying to feed, so that another application could say, oh, I've got this kind of data or this kind of hardware I can use. And let me check these individual pages to get that information for the different pieces to display to the end user, so that they can see like the specs, what's in the hardware. So this is one advantage to me of having that of going through Eleventy instead of just putting the JSON in your HTML directory directly, is that you can take it, you can break it down, you can do permalinks, you can process it using Eleventy's processing capabilities to do creative and more interesting things than if you just dump the whole blob inside of your web directory. The next example I have is an example of outputting your post content data as JSON. So at the top, we've got just a sample markdown file. It's got some front matter, it's got markdown. It goes through this template we have here in the middle, using again pagination. It's using the collections API Eleventy has. It's generating unique permalinks for every single page. So every single page has a JSON version in this configuration. And when that JSON version looks like, when you pull it up in the browser, you get an example here where it really is just JSON and text. And that's what program would see if you retrieved it. That's what the command line would see if you retrieved it. This is what it looks like if you take your site, take your markdown data, and put it out into JSON for other means to consume. And then the final example I have is just a real simple example of taking YAML and converting it into JSON. So at the very top left corner, I've got a super simple YAML file, just a little product definition. And then I've got in the middle of the template, all this really does is just build a unique permalink using information from the YAML that comes in. Thanks to that YAML data extension, I added in the eleventy.config or the eleventy.js file, which I will say I took from the Eleventy docs, how to do that. Eleventy can just parse that file, it reads it into the data cascade, and it makes it available the same as any other data, even though it's in YAML. So we build that URL, and we just put it out to JSON using the JSON filter I defined otherwise. And then you get this output like we did before, where it's the unique category and then the product name .json, and you get the full JSON output instead of the YAML output. So pretty straightforward. Not actually really that complex to do this. You can do a lot more with this though. You can do, like I said, JavaScript data files to retrieve and process your data in different ways and put it into Eleventy to manage. You could do more complex JSON than what I have. So if you've got database queries you want to run, or if you've got custom HTTP API pools that you're doing that give you JSON that you want to serve in some way without having to, that you want to expose to your end users without having to give them that direct access. Those are some different things you can do. And of course, you can use the Eleventy filters however you want, however Eleventy supports to transform your data, process your data, output the data in whatever kind of way to get beyond just, here's my page, here's my markdown. So I own up entirely. This is probably not one of the things that Eleventy was envisioned to use, but it's actually really good for this kind of stuff. And it's really helpful for these sort of niche corner cases. It's really powerful software and it's really, really helpful. And I've enjoyed working with it and using it. And that's all of the presentation I have right now. This is me. If anyone wants to get my information down, I also have the URL for the demonstration code that you've seen throughout this presentation here, there on that page. I appreciate you all listening to me.